Okay, so we are here for the Lord of the Mystery episode 2 cut content to get the answers to all my questions. Oh, here his power as explained. Okay, so I think that will be more detailed video than the previous one. Let's watch it.
We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches constantly fighting against dangers and madness. Such a quote defines what it means to be a beyonder, but we are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches constantly fighting against dangers and madness. Such a quote
Hmm,
defines what it means to be a beyonder, but for Klein, becoming one meant something a little bit different. It was all part of his efforts to get back home. Still, choosing to do so wasn't easy, and gaining the rights to become one was even more difficult. We just didn't get to see it since the whole event which earned him that right was left out. There was a whole cutscene involving this guy and Klein's assistance in capturing him. Aside from this are the insane amounts of lore the anime simply can't include, so if you're curious to know more about different sequences, Roselle's diaries, beyond her powers, or just grasp the story a little bit better, stick around as this will cover all of that.
hmm,
Let's get started. Episode 2 Beyonder, covering chapters 19 to 44 from Volume 1 of the web novel.
that's a lot of
With Klein
chapters.
now aware of all the risks associated with becoming a Beyonder, it was also important to know they weren't as powerful as he might imagine. Like, when it came to guns or any other ranged weapons, a low sequence Beyonder really wasn't any match for them. That being the case, it was yet another thing to consider when choosing to venture down this path of his. The main things to be wary of would always be the influence of the potion, though, so as long as he didn't consume the wrong to be whether it's Beyonder really Beyonder, it was also important to know they weren't as powerful as he might imagine. Like, when it came to guns or any other ranged weapons, a low sequence Beyonder really wasn't any match for them. That
Hmm,
being the case, it was yet another thing to consider when choosing to venture down this path of his. The main things to be wary of would always be the influence of the potion, though, so as long as he didn't consume the wrong potion and took his time to grasp control of his powers, the risk of losing control himself would remain low. Why would Klein even bear all that risk in the first place, though? Well, you gotta remember it was solely to find a way back home. If he was ever gonna return to the life from which he came from, then Klein knew he needed to understand the essence of mysticism here. Now, a key difference that leads to a major story shift in the novel is that even if Klein wanted to become a Beyonder right now, he wasn't allowed to since he still needed to prove himself. Whether that be by interpreting critical ancient documents or something else, his position mostly depended on the arrangements of the higher ups. How then did Klein proceed to prove himself? Well, that's a bit of cut content we'll talk about later on in this video. For now, Dunn would go on to explain the responsibilities of all the other civilian staff members. These were the tasks Klein believed he would be responsible for as well, but as it turns out, Dunn had something else in mind. His only tasks were to find hints of the notebook's whereabouts and read all the literature in the armory. Next, Dunn would point out the large structure known as the Chaunis Gate, identifying it as a core component under every central cathedral in every major city. It was founded by the man who created the Nighthawks, and behind it lay potion formulas, magic materials, and even a holding ground for heretics, mutants, cultists, or other nefarious people. The gate is always guarded by at least one formal Nighthawk member, and inside are two keepers provided by the church. Countless traps defended it as well, so under no circumstance was Klein to ever go beyond the Chaunis Gate. Inside were all sorts of classified documents and records, then in the basement were items known as sealed artifacts. These were extraordinary tools that, if placed in the wrong hands, could cause immense destruction. Some even have certain living characteristics, and that could go to influence their surroundings, attempt to escape, or try something even worse.
was
So,
this
in a way,
explained in
these sealed
the
artifacts were
previous
kind of like
episode 2? I
SCPs,
think I don't think
anomalous
it was
type
shown,
entities
right?
that needed to be strictly monitored and controlled. These artifacts are also graded on a scale where, at the top, they were extremely dangerous and not to be talked about in any capacity, while anything lower could be used with specific limitations or basic care and moderation. The lowest grade was still considerably dangerous, but as long as it was used carefully, it could be brought out for operations that required 3 or more people. Now, to quickly know how dangerous an artifact was, one simply needed to look at the numbering. For the one in episode 3, this was
Yeah, it's episode 3.
2-040, the Grade 2 sealed artifact number 40. Dunn would then mention a corrupted archbishop who lost control and stole one of the most dangerous artifacts the church had, but that's a story I'm sure will be mentioned later. Of the foreshadowing they did give, though, it was received like a very ominous warning since this was one of the artifacts they couldn't even keep records on.
Hmm.
Everything about it needed to be passed on verbally. Never could it be written into words. It was after this that Klein would be sent to see Neil, a once formal member of the Nighthawks no longer suitable to handle cases anymore. He had refused to be a keeper of the Chaunas Gates, so now he simply spent his days accompanied by his documents and records. Documents Klein was sent to help him arrange here. This would first be after Dunn had given him his advance payment, since as someone who's seen his place, Dunn felt Klein needed an upgrade. He also needed to purchase a cane and a new suit too. It was then that Klein would turn to head to Old Neil's, but 2 more times Dunn would interrupt him to remind him of something else. For protection, he needed to carry some demon hunting bullets, then for practice he was to go to the range and fire 30 regular bullets daily. The police owned their own underground shooting range, part of which could be used by the Nighthawks. So this was all part of making Klein ready for his next tasks. After this was a cutscene introducing the character Oriana, since she was the accountant who would give Klein his pay. How did she end up working for the Nighthawks? Well, that's a story not too different from Klein's. You see, it was 16 years ago that a serial killer was terrorizing the city, butchering women in a series of gruesome murders that left them gutted. Oriana was about to be that killer's 6th victim, up until the Nighthawks had saved her. As it turns out, this butcher was a Beyonder, and his numerous victims were all part of a sadistic ritual preparation for the devil. Well, Oriana was luckily spared from it, and it was ever since that she'd been working for the Nighthawks. It was while Oriana was sharing all that Klein would also be admiring the money he was given. As someone so absurdly passionate about it, Klein couldn't help but take in the money's magnificence. He would also recount the figures imprinted on it, both of which were former monarchs. There was Henry Augustus I, who Klein felt an indescribable closeness to, then William Augustus VI, the man responsible for freeing the Lowen Kingdom from the shackles of the Old Order. He had enabled his nation to regain its spot at the top. So, that was all the tidbits of lore from prior to Klein's meeting with Neil, an encounter which would introduce the Emperor Roselle more. When it came to his lost diaries, the reason so many copies existed was because many believed Roselle never actually died. They instead think he became a god himself, hidden from society but still worth worshipping. It was at all these cult rituals the Nighthawks would occasionally find Roselle's notebooks, leading to the ones Neil has in possession here. Now, the records Klein read were pretty much the same in the novel, but the one about the guy trapped in a deep darkness also mentioned he could approach reality on the day of the full moon every month. His entry about potions highlighted the importance of acting, as well as the name of the potion being the key to digestion. The next entry came from 9 months later, and that was the news of an opposition forming against him. With the Faesak in the north, the Lowen from the east, and the Faena Potter in the south, all Roselle's enemies had joined together to fight him. Still, Roselle was confident he would come out on top, mentioning something about higher grade sequences. His next entry was about losing communication with a ship seeking the forsaken land of the gods, then the one after was about a woman named Ithaca who he seemed to like more than Florena. That last one wasn't really that important, but all the others bore priceless information Klein could take advantage of. Digesting and acting were extremely significant, then this forsaken land of the gods seemed quite important too. It was when Klein was brought back to reality that his inquiry for more entries led to quite the interesting revelation. You see, with not many Beyonder-related incidents happening anymore, there haven't been many opportunities to procure these types of resources. Potions were becoming more and more scarce since, over the past few centuries, the monsters required to make them have become more just records and books. What I mean is that you'd be hard-pressed to find dragons, giants, elves, or even sea folk anywhere. This led to some jokes about creating the Fantastic Beasts Protection Association, then proceeded into the matter about getting
So they
bullets for
need
his
monster
revolver.
material to make the potion.
It's here where the anime starts to really branch off, since rather than segue immediately into Klein becoming a Beyonder himself, he instead leaves, runs into Leonard, who Klein quickly perceives as a little bit gay, then goes home to settle all his household affairs first. There was an interesting line where Leonard makes a random comment seemingly to no one, but that was just an action Klein didn't look very much into. Now, it was right before Klein would leave the Nighthawks that he would first have a deeper conversation with Roseanne. The whole thing essentially fleshed out her, since Klein was asking questions pertaining to Beyonders while she was doing everything she could to convince him not to become one. Since her father was an unfortunate casualty of it, this whole realm of mystery was an area she disagreed with wholeheartedly. It was a sentiment backed by some rather wise words from her father. 2 weeks before he had sacrificed himself, he had mentioned how one should never think they can resolve hidden risks or combat by simply becoming more powerful or a higher sequence. To him, it was actually quite the opposite. In the end, death and insanity were the only two outcomes, and that was a fact which proved true for him especially. That's when Klein would insist he only wanted to know the basics, so after a bit of pushing, Roseanne would finally cave for him. She would reveal high sequence Beyonders were going extinct. There were only about 30 or so Beyonders in their entire city to begin with, but when it came to those who were really high up there, very few were still around anywhere these days.
Why?
Then, for the Beyonders who were around, most were only at Sequence 9. Roseanne then spoke about the path the Church of the Evernight Goddess held full possession of, identifying their Sequence 9 as the Sleepless. This was someone who didn't need to sleep at night. It's not like they didn't sleep at all, but unlike a normal person, they could get by with only 3 to 4 hours of it during the day. Their other powers were the ability to see through darkness without any lights, an increase in power the deeper into the night it was,
I knew the
enhanced
first one.
strength, intuition, and mental capacity when it was night, then an innate ability to detect unknown dangers that lay in the dark. They weren't so strong as to possess any supernatural abilities, though, so in order to fight monsters, they still relied on bullets or other means. After that was the Sequence 8 Midnight Poet, then beyond that was the Sequence 7 Nightmare. These were the sequences Leonard and Dunn were at, and Dunn was one of only 2 Sequence 7s in the entire city.
Whoa.
That was all Roseanne knew for that path, so Klein would then ask about more of the other Sequence 9s. He was looking for whichever allowed him to study and grasp more knowledge. If he could somehow end up on a path like that, then he figured he could leverage that to find a way back to his old life. Unfortunately, the only one Roseanne could recall was Mystery Prior, then an incomplete Sequence 7 title by the name of Spirit Medium. This would be all the information Klein could get, leading to his departure and eventful journey back home.
Welcome to Second Life, the cinematic metaverse, where every
By the way, I'm
detail
not
is
talking
crafted
much
for
in these
realism
videos
and
the
immersion.
Lord of Mysteries
Explore
entire series
breathtaking worlds.
because I want to catch everything they
It's
are saying. Otherwise I will be just
here we get into
speaking
quite a bit
and
of
miss
cut
something
content too,
important.
but the topics it deals with aren't entirely important. There was Klein's stop to purchase the cheapest yet most practical cane he could find, a review of the Lowen Kingdom's regulation on firearms and weapon permits, a brief moment practicing the draw of his gun over and over, then the reveal of his new job as a consultant to Melissa. Klein wanted to go out to eat to celebrate, but Melissa insisted he save his money instead. She was even against moving out too, since to her, their living conditions weren't as bad as they could be. This then led to a whole chapter of Klein trying to convince Melissa otherwise, citing reasons like societal expectations and marriages. Melissa was still way more concerned with financial stability, so this was a conversation the two would have to have later. For now, Klein would have to deal with other matters, specifically the job interview which he now needed to withdraw from. This brings us to a scene in the university, and is actually the place where we first meet Azik. That, however, is a scene from episode 3, so we can leave that one for later. What comes next is probably the most important cut content so far, since it's a sequence of events earning Klein his spot as a Beyonder. The whole arc is 4 chapters total though, so unfortunately this will be a very basic rundown of it. Just remember, Klein doesn't get to be a Beyonder just because he wants to. It's a position he first had to work for. As for the way he had earned it, well, in the novel, it was because of how he handled the man who was following him here. Turns out he went beyond just stalking him on the street, and even went so far as to break into Klein's house. He had done so at a time when Klein was asleep, but thanks to a timely warning from Dunn in his dreams, Klein was able to wake up and force the man out. Leonard and Dunn then took care of things from there, revealing the man to be part of an ancient organization known as the Secret Order, an underground group established in the Fourth Epoch and related to the Solomon Empire. It was from them that the Antigonus notebook had originated, and it was only due to their negligence that it was lost. So it was this man who was tasked with retrieving it, unfortunately leading to his capture here. Now, normally the Secret Order was very difficult to deal with, so the fact Klein was able to assist with the capture of one of its members, well, that was a contribution worth rewarding. It's because of this that Dunn would present him with an offer very few were given. He could either continue accumulating merit and wait to qualify as a worthy member of the fully complete Sleepless Path, or become a Beyonder now and choose one of the Sequence 9s from the 3 other incomplete paths they had. The first was the previously mentioned Mystery Priors, and that originated
Isn't he
from a
already
strictly
beyonder,
confidential
like
group
in
known as the
Sequence
Moses
9,
Ascetic Order.
after being
They
a
were a
seer?
strong-willed order centered around the maxim, do as you wish, but do no harm. Their Sequence 9 potion granted a rudimentary understanding of anything magic-related, so that included witchcraft, astrology, and any other mystical knowledge. Mystery Priors also became knowledgeable in a great deal of magic rituals, but that opened the door to the ability to sense certain existences they maybe shouldn't. Beings hidden amongst matter they'd have to be careful around. Next was the Corpse Collector, and this gave anyone who digested it the same properties an undead would have. Unintelligent dead spirits would mistake them as one of their own. They would gain resistance to the cold, decay, and corrosiveness of death auras, then they would be able to see evil spirits and the characteristics or weaknesses of undead. So this was a path the church actually had the Sequence 8 and 7 potions to as well, one you might recognize as Daly's Spirit Medium. Finally, there was the Seer path, and consuming this potion granted a greater understanding of
he's a seer, right?
astromancy, cartomancy, spiritual pendulums, and scrying. That didn't mean he'd understand all of them immediately, but it did grant him the ability to learn it. It was a path not necessarily suited for fighting, but in terms of knowledge and mysticism, it was far better than the Mystery Prior. The only setbacks were the incomplete it was far better than the Mystery Prior. The only setbacks were the incomplete nature of the path itself, its inability to be used in combat well, the risk of losing control as a Beyonder, than the overall believability of Roselle's diaries. As stressful as such a choice was, though, all that was incomparable to the terrible feeling of not being able to return to Earth again. You see, after recalling all these fond memories of his past life, Klein knew the only right path was the one forward. It was one only achievable by becoming a Beyonder. Fast forward past a couple chapters of Klein choosing his new house, moving out, then moving in, and that's when we finally get back to the Blackthorn Security Company. Klein would express his intent to become a seer, stating how the other pathways just didn't meet his requirements. Now, when I said taking the potion would only give Klein the ability to learn about mysticism, what I meant was that there would be 3 places from which the knowledge he was seeking would come from. The first was experimentation, summarization, and enhancements. The second would be from the gods themselves, then the third the dangerous murmurings and illusory enticements Beyonders were occasionally exposed to. There were sometimes cases where these mysterious voices would describe matters related to mysticism. Should one try to listen to those voices for a bit too long, though, there was no doubt they'd eventually go mad, fall to corruption, then become monsters. It's for those who do unfortunately meet that fate that it's their notebooks that are usually filled with all sorts of valuable information. In any case, Klein taking this potion didn't make him a formal member of the Beyonder team. He was still to be a civilian staff member, simply because it would take time to adapt to whatever power he develops. I mean, to go out and take part in paranormal missions right from the get-go, well, that would mean certain death for sure. When it came to building the potion itself, for sequences of 7 and below, those typically didn't require anything other than the exact ingredients, where beyond that one might have to participate in the ritual on a spiritual level. For 7, 8, and 9, one simply needed to follow the formula and mix it. In fact, not all the ingredients even needed to be exact, as for the Seer potion in particular, it was only the last 2 that needed precise measurements. They could be slightly under by just a little bit, but if they were ever too much, then anything from a mental breakdown to death could happen. So
Oh,
it's those
that's
last two
risky.
ingredients that were put in with great precision, and it was once finished that Klein would proceed to ingest it. The anime does a great job animating the entire process of it, but for those wondering why he needed to envision what he did, it was also he could stabilize his mind and gain control again. By focusing on something he knew, he was able to mitigate the potion's energy and reduce any seepage of it. Next, Neil taught him how to manage the physical manifestation of the potion's powers, and this was through a method called cogitation. It was a meditative state that converged the potion's powers inward. It was while in this state that Klein would be able to see and understand the truth, revealing knowledge only he himself could understand. It was a unique phenomenon classified as a mystic experience, something only possible while in this state of cogitation. Neil would then teach Klein spirit vision, one of the most foundational abilities for pretty much any Beyonder. It was a mystical power that would allow him to perceive supernatural and non-physical phenomena. It wasn't a power one developed naturally, though, but was instead something he would have to train. So, first Neil would have him discover his aura, one of 4 non-physical parts split from a person's biological body. Aura was part of a person's ether body, and that reflected a person's physical health and emotion. On the deepest inner part was a person's soul body, and that referred to their spiritual core. Beyond that was the astral projection, and that was a person's spiritual connection to the cosmos. It was the part most commonly used for divinations and spellcasting. Finally, there was the body of heart and mind, and that was the connection to one's brain and mental capacity. For potions that improved one's analysis and observation, this would be the area it would typically target. So, for now, Klein would be focused on aura, where every color he would see would indicate something different. This applied to the astral projection level as well, meaning Klein should be able to easily read how a person was feeling too. Finally, he would see inanimate objects didn't emit spiritual traces like organic ones, but materials from extraordinary beings did. Though the creature it came from was dead, some of their leftover parts still carried what's called remnant spiritualities. They were typically the parts most crucial to potion making. Now, I know episode 2 still has that whole part with Leonard and Klein, but considering how far behind I am and the isolated nature of that specific incident, I might skip ahead to focus on the incident with the clown. I will try my best to keep making timely videos for this, but there's just so much content it's hard to keep up with it. That said,
Yeah.
I could skip ahead to the current episode, or I could stay where we're at and remain 4 episodes behind. Either way, I should be able to keep it going weekly alongside the Overlord videos. You just might see a gap from like episode 3 to episode 7.
Okay. I do get some answers, not every answer to the question, obviously, but a lot of questions were answered. But the more I, get into this thought of the mysteries, the more mysteries there are than the answer in comparison. So yeah, we will still be watching the Lord of the Mysteries because really like the animation. That is the main reason I'm watching right now. I think the story will also get interesting. I am hoping so. Okay, so that was the second episode of the Lord of the Mysteries cut content. I hope you like the video, and I'm sorry there are not much reaction from me in these videos because I'm just focusing too much on the content to not miss anything. So yeah, goodbye, have a happy life.